Good morning. Good afternoon. Sorry, listeners. Let me turn that music off. I'm sure it's playing low in the background. How are you today? This is Jim the Keys Bartender coming to you from a beautiful Key Largo, Florida Keys. It's mid-70s and sunny outside. I just came in from a short nap I took after working out. I teach my spin class at the gym. I go in, I get up. My routine today is I drove my daughter to school, went to the bank, go into the gym, do some lifting for about an hour and 10 minutes, and then go and teach my spin class. And then come home, cook myself some lunch. And there's nothing better. Lunch. I guess that was a late breakfast, early lunch. And prior to doing that, I was pulling in a recycle bin alongside my house, and this was surprising. I guess surprising to me. I've lived here 8 years in this home, and there's this beautiful bush alongside the house, and I thought it was nice before. I really did. I liked the leaves. I knew it blossomed every so often, but I don't think I've ever really appreciated what it looked like. I put the cover photo for the episode is of the Starburst Bush, and I'll tie it in with everything. It's not just about, I'm not talking about a beautiful bush. Not that some guys haven't, depending on what you consider bush nowadays, because there's not a lot of bush left out there when you're talking about certain type. The bush has disappeared. But for people's lawns, there's tons of bush, right? And it's for the time I've lived here, I've never really appreciated what it looked like when it was in bloom, right at the height. And that's what it looks like, the picture that I put on the episode. And I guess the word would be ephemeral, meaning it doesn't last long. It doesn't happen frequently. The blossoming of the bush. Same thing as the geraniums and things like that. They always have the nice green to it, but not always blossom. And it made me think, I said, boy, I really don't pay attention to the things around me. I really don't. So I better just kind of slow down and start paying attention to things, especially since I live in this subtropical paradise. And so after I cooked myself something to eat and things like that, I said, well, how can I slow down today? So because I was going to go right into podcasting, my mind racing and all that stuff. And I thought, you know what? I did really good the other day with taking a nap in the middle of the day. I just stopped, started meditating, and then fell asleep, which is perfectly fine when it comes to things like that. But I have a hammock out front, and it's a relatively quiet street I live on, so I just laid in the sun for almost an hour. And I hate to say it because it makes me seem old. It was glorious. And after I do that, I'm kind of a little, groggy. I got to sit up and do all sorts of stuff, like wait for me to get acclimated and then come here and think about what I'm going to talk about when we're on the show. But I knew I was going to be talking about perception and color and things like that today. And it does help when you're at a job and you find it mundane or routine. Just think about it. I guess if you were on an assembly line and every day was the same thing going by, if you're doing one particular thing and it really doesn't change. For me, where I work, we have tourists, we have regulars that come in, people you don't get the chance to talk to, people you don't really appreciate. But coming across that Starburst Bush made me think, wow, I can really think about that. Think about the things I really don't pay attention to when they come up, like where people are from, how they're enjoying their stay here, what they're doing. Like there was a nice young couple who came in and they were getting, the young lady was getting her dive certification. I didn't know if it was her boyfriend or her husband, but they were sitting at the bar and they were very pleasant. They came in the night before and they were meeting a large group of people, I guess from the same dive boat. They would come in and they decided to come in the second night to have a couple drinks and some appetizers, and they came in. They were very nice, very pleasant, and they were from my neck of the woods. They're from New Jersey, the Medford area. So I thought that was really nice to come in, but I never really get the chance to see that. And I see these other people that come in, and I'll talk about some of the things they did share with the other day. I had my friends Ace, Martha, Dan. They were in. I had a couple that own a bar near Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. I thought that was interesting because Ace had spent some time near the park. One of our friends that come into the bar there, Ace, he had spent a significant amount of time at a friend's ranch near Mount Rushmore, and he described it to me. It made me feel more connected to it. But I always thought, man, I got to feel connected to the place I am sometimes and the people I'm around. And a lot of times I get into work and I'm just tired. And I just don't, when you're tired, you just don't have time or effort or the ability to see things you don't see all the time when someone comes in. There's a lovely couple, Dee and Jim, that come in, and Jim's a couple years older than me, and I never really spoke to him that often, and it turned out he's very funny and a nice soft-spoken guy. And he's not one of those guys that are funny inadvertently. He's advertently funny, meaning he's on purpose. And Dee's just pleasant and lovely woman, and I appreciate people more often when I take my time and just don't say, the same people all over again. It's the same thing every day. It's not the same thing every day. If you have a varied life, it could be the same thing every day if you lived in a prison, in a closed environment. I mean, that's always like the nightmare thing. You're just sitting in a white room with a white table, white chair, white clothes, and you just get the same food, the same interactions with people and things like that. That's a nightmare to me. But when you think about how big the world is and how incredibly diverse everything is around you, it's just around us. There's worlds of things going on. I don't know if I mentioned in the episode yesterday, but I think I did, about the Bofu toad. The Bofu toad's an invasive toad that was put into cane field to control the insects. And it turned out that it was the wrong toad they put in. They did put the Bofu toad in. They were trying to put another toad in from Central America, and this one was poisonous. And Abby, my wife, was driving to work, and she's driving down past the neighbor's house, and she thought someone was throwing tennis balls at her, and it turns out it was toads, these toads that were staying warm under the hood of her car during the night when it got cool here. Because they're from Central America, they're not used to getting into lower 60s, so they were getting someplace cold, and they hopped out. You don't really get the chance to see them all the time. And even though they're invasive, just like the iguana, you may see an iguana run by. Yesterday I saw an iguana run by, about 2.5 foot long iguana. And I guess you just see one run by nowadays. If you're not used to that, you could be shocked when you see something that's a large reptile in front of you, like a foot in front of you. But nowadays, I guess here, it's mundane. It's a normal occurrence. Or you see something, a pretty color of blue on a flower. Just, you don't stop. It's like stopping. They say, yes, you got to take time to stop and smell the roses and appreciate the things that are going on around you. And that's what taking that 45 minutes to an hour, just relaxing in the hammock and enjoying the sun on my face did for me today. It's kind of a reset. And I appreciate that. To address something else, Ace mentioned to me, even though I do live shows, I was saying something that he wanted to respond to. And I don't know what that was. I'm sure I said something he may have wanted to comment on. I don't know if he disagreed on it or that. It doesn't really matter. What I mean is it doesn't matter. I didn't have the phone lines open. I have this chat section. If you have, let me invite friends on. If you, Ace, if you have Facebook, I'll put the invitation. We are live now. I'm going to put we are live, and if you want, we are live now. And if you do have any comment, the thing about taking phone calls, it's not a difficult task for me to do it, but it's much simpler for me to do the podcast live without setting up my microphones and setting up Skype and setting up some of the virtual linkages I have to in order to get a phone call and set up my audio so I can hear the phone call and bring in the audio into the show. And that's one of the things I really want to do. That's why I still want to get 1 million downloads this year. It's a slow start. It's better than the beginning of last year. We're doing much better numbers, but I need to have a more, I guess, in-depth or have a producer or an assistant. I would call him a producer, him or her, a producer, to help me do the technological things that need to be done when you're taking phone calls and doing a live show. But right now, you could, if you wanted to chat, I'm going to say, look, I'll write my message. I am here, Ace. He says it's, I should put it, make sure. Ace. And that's the one thing. If you can, you got to text. Okay? And I mean, it's not that I wouldn't want to take your call. I'm not necessarily looking for a debate, but obviously there's things I say that some people disagree with, and my hat's off to you guys that still listen after you take. I don't say you take note. I don't want to say take offense, because if you took offense, you probably wouldn't be listening anymore. Say Jim is offensive. He is an asshole. I still may be an asshole. I still may be offensive, but I don't do that. I don't do that out of a particular. I don't take a particular glee in or satisfaction from offending anyone. But if you are offended by language, I am sorry to my relatives that may listen and things like that. I do appreciate, but this is just some of the words I use. I guess it balances out those 5 and dime words. Oh, what do they call those? 10-cent words, word for powers, the ones you'd read from the Reader's Digest, and you use the word. It gets stuck in my head. I mean, I've said it previously. That's the word I know to use for that particular thing I want to say. So, moving on. We got all this stuff. And I do endeavor, if we do get those listeners, if we do get the amount of listeners and get more robust return for that, a more vigorous, large. It sounds like one of those Viagra commercials. A turgid, rigid. No. The larger audience you have, the more capabilities I can have. Because I'm able to hire somebody. But I'm not going to pay someone. There's only so much money I want to lose doing this thing while I'm doing it. I'm not looking to retire on this, but if I do get to retire on, that'd be good too. Maybe not good for you because you say, oh, this guy doesn't have anything new to say. Nothing's new on his son. But I want to talk about history. Nothing in particular about history. Just the study of history. And recently, here in Florida, and don't get all pissed off, guys, but people don't, I mean, I don't want you to get all pissed, but there could be a rule passed that history should not be taught in the schools, and this is the governor's maybe sponsoring a resolution that they don't want to retell or study or talk about history that would make students feel uncomfortable about themselves. Okay? Well, that's the opposite. That's anti-history. History is an objective. This is what happened. This is when happened. Now, you can interpret the meaning behind it. That's analysis. But things happened. You could talk about it. But it either happened or it didn't happen. Men, and a lot of history in the world history, men were always the aggressor, or mostly the aggressor. And, when bad acts occurred, a lion's share of the bad acts were done by men, because men had the power, men had the ability to do it, and things like that. I'm sure there were women that do a lot of women did some bad things throughout history, but large things of note, large historical events were usually committed by males. Now, if we did not teach those events, we said, well, it's going to make males feel uncomfortable, then you'd be wiping out 90% of all history. Right? So it's pretty interesting. I'm gonna focus on one particular thing. Native American history, the way it's depicted previously. Now, when you see a Western from, let's say, any time up to the 1960s, up until the late 1960s, Native American interactions with Western civilization were depicted as hostiles, aggressors, very violent. And you had the hardworking settler coming in, and then the Native Americans coming in and attacking them, or them attacking the fort and the cavalry riding to the rescue, the U.S. cavalry riding to the rescue, your stagecoach, and all those things. That the depiction of the Native Americans showed them as aggressors, and rarely do they say, in some of those movies, rarely do they show that their lands were taken from them. They were there first. And they could have been spread out. They could have been spread out for a while. So I guess when people arrived in the West to go and see all this land, and there's no one living there, right? But because the Native Americans of the Northern Plains, let's say, they were migratory and didn't have large tilled fields because they're more hunter-gatherers. Some of them did get involved with agriculture, but by and large they did a lot of hunting and living off the land. So that you wouldn't see large homesteads or cities or things like that. And their populations weren't overwhelming. So it was easy for you as, let's say, an explorer to say, well, these aren't being really used. These aren't being utilized. These lands. As time goes on, they start traveling through, and they say, well, we're just coming through. We're just going through this area in order to get to the other side, to get to the West Coast, to get to ports of San Francisco, or to get to the gold rush in California or Yukon Territory and things like that. And then it was, oh, wow, before that, it was like, we're just getting some of these furs because these furs are highly prized in Europe. And so interactions occurred sometimes with the trappers and the people that were traveling through. Native Americans may see them and say, oh, well, they're just going through. They're not setting up shop. They're going all the way across. And then there were people that started setting up shop. And they go, this was my favorite watering hole. This could have been our winter camp where we would set our tents up. And now there's a town there. Well, we'll just move over to the right. And then they just can see more and more and more. And then eventually someone said, well, listen, in order to get the cattle, we're going to start dividing up this land. And we're going to put barbed wire across. And they just said, what? Now we can't go across. We need to have proof. We're not allowed to go in. We're not allowed to go through this town, the tribe, because no Indians are allowed in town. And the government is set up, a couple thousand miles away. They're going to set up a Bureau of Indian Affairs and do all these things, and eventually say, well, these people aren't very happy with, and in further analysis, they said these people are not really happy with the things we're doing. We're just going to ignore what they want, and we'll give you some land, but this will be the treaty we set up. And then they violate all these things, and that's history. That actually happened. It's not fake. The Indians didn't necessarily come to attack Washington, D.C., maybe early on, if they felt, I'm sure there were Native Americans that were aggressors. And I know there's some tribes that were more aggressive than other tribes. They were competing for certain, migratory herds and things like that. And they may decide that they needed to prove something. But, it mainly was a Western expansion, was Western civilization pushing out Native Americans. And then in the 60s, they started saying, oh, well, we did do that. And then later on, more and more, they started realizing, we violated a lot of treaties and things like that. And then, they see they're building a railroad, and then they go and destroy all the stocks of their migratory herds of buffalo, just to feed the workers, and then just to deny them food stocks. That's history, and that makes people uncomfortable. It just happened. And it happened all over the world. It happened in Australia. It happened whenever an advanced civilization came across a lesser, more hunter-gatherer civilization. It's not like a more, I'd say, objectively superlative civilization unseating another. If they called them beastly or uncivilized or whatever they wanted to call it, didn't make it necessarily right. But we depict that in movies. Now, how is that different than the way we depict in our science fiction when an advanced civilization comes in contact with humans? Right? Who do we cheer for? Who do we cheer for when Predator comes from a far-off planet and starts hunting humans in the jungles of Central America, and Arnold Schwarzenegger? That's the movie Predator. Or what was that other one? The one, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and things like that. Most of the movies, interesting movies, are when hostile advanced civilizations come in contact with human civilization. And we almost always side with the humans, saying, well, hey, we were here first. You can't land your spaceship there. You knocked over the Washington Monument. It was in one of the movies where they come in and they clip the Washington Monument, go, oops, our bad, sorry, knocked over the Washington Monument. Or the even worse one, Independence Day, where they come and say, fuck you. This looks like a nice place. It's like a beach. Imagine it's like a beach chair, a beautiful part of the beach. And someone says, I don't care if you're sitting there at this beach. We're coming in and we're setting up our tents and having a little party here. So get the fuck off the beach. Well, that's what they see. There's a plan. They say, well, listen, we don't need you here because we're going to try to harvest some resources here. And because of our technological ability, we're just going to steamroll you. We're not even going to negotiate with you. At least, I guess one benefit from it, the U.S. government at many times attempted to negotiate with Native Americans. People saying, listen, maybe we shouldn't just take everything from them. Maybe we should talk to them about saying, well, you can have this and we can have that. And then we said, well, we want to have a little more. And then they renegotiate the things they renegotiated in the first place. No, in the movies, they don't accept, what was that? Well, there was a couple movies where aliens come in and they say, well, listen, maybe we can accommodate them. If you give us this, we'll give you that. And then all of a sudden, like in the Twilight Zone, there was where aliens arrive and they say, we're gonna cure aging, illness, all this stuff, give you undue knowledge, invite you back to our planet. There you go. On top of, we're going to invite you back to your planet. And they're all looking in this book. And we're here just to help you. We're here just to help you. And the book, the title of the book, they had a code breakers, and that, check out this book that the aliens had, and it said how to serve man. And you go, oh, well, look, the cover of the book says how to help men. Well, no, it was how to serve man. It was a cookbook. And they were gathering humans up to eat them. And we made these advanced, I'm beating the dead horse there. I'm just saying, in history, the far-fetched history, let's say that did happen, and aliens landed and say, listen, there were humans here, but there were savages. They were polluting the water. They were killing the creatures. There was all these species every year. Thousands upon thousands of species became extinct, not through natural geographic or geological or meteorological changes, but through human caused extinctions. Overfishing, overhunting, they harvested these beautiful tusks off these elephants just so they can make jewelry and pianos and little figurines. They were savages, these people. So we just freed the planet of this abusive life that allowed the rest of the planet to flourish. And that would be the history. We wouldn't have any say in that history. Right? If they won, because we all know that the victors write the history. When all you had to say was, well, a more advanced civilization landed, and they wanted what we had on the planet, and we tried to stop them, and it didn't work. And they could tell, both can tell that story that way. They wanted what we have. We didn't want to give it to them because they kept on wanting more and more, and they did. So why couldn't we tell history that way? It happens in every civilization when someone has more technological savvy, tactical savvy, knowledge, right? More brute force. So when someone talks to Genghis Khan, I've read a little about Genghis Khan and stuff. Genghis Khan may have not have been the Mongolian hordes. They could just be, who knows? They could have just been history. The way history was written, that civilizations around them could have been impinging on their migratory traditions. So, because they had the ability as horsemen and be able to shoot arrows from the back of horseback, they had the technological know-how to be able to expand rapidly. Because other people say, what the fuck? These guys ride like crazy and they can shoot arrows from the back of a horse while they're moving, and we got to stand still, and they're coming at us and hitting us with arrows and stuff like that, and we can't resist that. So eventually the civilizations push back, and they write a history and say the Mongols were bloodthirsty, cruel, they did some horrible things and all that stuff. Yeah, the victors do right. You could just talk about that. Look, World War II. World War II, there was concentration camps. There's still remnants of those concentration camps. We still have living reminders of it. And pretty much most serious historians, overwhelming amount of historians, realize what happened. But the victors got the stories. And when it comes to the Germans, they kind of sugarcoated some of the things. Not genocide. Genocide, they didn't sugarcoat as much. But they talked about the worst thing with the Japanese. Japanese did some pretty horrible things, but so did the Allies, if you want to do it the thing. And it was easier to write that history because you have aggressors that did some pretty horrible things. World War I isn't necessarily an easy history to write about. World War I isn't, because a lot of things happened on both sides that were similar. So I think the Germans do introduce mustard gas to warfare, and the machine gun was widely used in tanks and things by both sides. And bombing, aerial bombardment, which kind of first started really including civilians. And both sides are pretty much intensely, they did mostly bad things, both sides. World War II, easier, more cut and dry. But they can also say that the reason why Japanese were attacking Pearl Harbor was to deny the U.S. a base for its Navy, to deny Japanese expansion where they needed they perceived was their natural resources. They needed to get a hold of oil reserves, metals, and things like that. And having a powerful United States presence in the Pacific was not good for them at that time. And they were doing some pretty horrible things in Korea, Vietnam, and the Far East. Who's calling right now? That's Abby. I'm going to sign off and talk to my wife. I want to thank you for listening. This is, I don't mean to be ham-handed, but that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. It's really pretty much. I guess I should tie it up a little better. But history is in the eye of the beholder, and you can objectively look at it and say, this is what happened. The slave trade did happen. Yes, there were Africans involved in the slave trade, meaning they captured some enemy tribesmen, maybe something like that, and turned them over to the slave traders on the African coast where they had to set up their trading posts. But once they got on the ship, once slavery was making its way to Europe and the New World, it was all Western civilization, Europeans that were involved in that. It was all that. And people say, well, you Africans. Yeah, well, yeah. Yes, there were Africans involved in the slave trade. But the impetus for creating the market for it, there would not be. And I'm not laying necessarily blame, because I believe almost every advanced civilization moving through time before they were fully enlightened had slaves. The Egyptians, the Romans, that's just the way they ran their economy. The Chinese, the Japanese. It was one of those things. It's just one of those things that happened. But it doesn't make it less bad. And without having the market for slavery in the New World, there would have been no need to ship them over or to do the trade over here. And there were slave holders, and some of them were brutal and things like that. It just happened. It just happened. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it worse. It actually makes it worse. But you can talk about those things. And if you feel bad because you share a characteristic with one of those people, if you happen to be white, so be it. KKK was powerful in southern and northern politics for the longest time. The Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, made up of white people trying to preserve their political hegemony in the United States. They didn't want to share it. So they interfered. And there was a lot of things that went on. There was horrible violence that went on. There was lynchings and things like that. And and you can say, oh, Jim, there's crime that goes on nowadays. Well, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that. And that's history. It legitimately occurred. And if you don't want to talk about it because it makes you feel uncomfortable, that's a shame. That's a shame. It's easier to see the world and being able to appreciate the world for how far we've come. Like supposedly in the United States, and I think we don't have slavery anymore. That's a big deal. We were one of the last far-flung thing, one of the largest slaveholding societies in world history. Someone has disagreement whether the Egyptians had a larger one or we did, but it was large. And it was cruel and it was brutal. So just teach the history the way it was. The Egyptians did it. We don't say the Egyptians didn't contribute anything to society. The Greeks did it. The Greeks were the founder of people in Western civilization. They were the bedrock of Western civilization, was Greek philosophy and teachings and sciences. Brought forward by carried a little further by the Romans. Romans were more the engineers. But they did the same thing. So I don't think... I hear things about things in my background, my ancestry, and I don't feel bad about it. It's just history. I don't carry that kind of, what would you call that, guilt? It was like original sin, the original sin. Why would you want to think that something someone else did prior is something that you carry with you today, but you can still recognize it. You can recognize it and you don't have to feel bad about yourself. You are who you are now and how you behave. And you shouldn't use your discomfort or you're uncomfortable about hearing about this at, altering history, altering the way it's taught. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'm started signing off because of a phone call, but I'm going to give her a call right back. It could have been an emergency. Thank you very much and have a good day.